Well, let's bring you some breaking news now. And EU diplomats are to hold emergency talks on Monday to discuss imposing further sanctions on Russia over Ukraine. The US claims Russian military planes have entered Ukrainian airspace several times, with Washington calling on Moscow to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, talks continue to secure the release of international observers seized by separatists. Let's go live to Donetsk in Ukraine. Our Foreign Affairs editor Sam Kiley is there. So, Sam, details emerging of another meeting, this time on Monday with EU diplomats.
Yes, I think it's significant that it's officials, not at a ministerial level, and that is because over the last few weeks the EU member states have individually been trying to figure out how they can apply sanctions to Russia without significantly damaging their own economies, or what needs to be done strategically to adjust their, for example, dependence on Russian gas in the long term if they do impose sanctions, and there are some counter-sanctions imposed out of the Kremlin. Bear in mind that the European Union is a international body of democratically elected leaders, whereas in Russia, Vladimir Putin, whilst elected, of course, has been clamping down on political opposition and indeed the independent media, and could do something that in the short term hurts the Russian economy just to bite back at these European sanctions. We should not expect too much of the Europeans. $360 billion worth of trade between Europe and Russia every year. Compare that to the $27 billion between Russia and the United States, and you get an idea of what it really means to the Europeans. Meanwhile, there has been this military escalation coming from the Russians of military incursions, this time in terms of airspace, flashing up, trying to identify the Ukrainian air defences and radar installations. That would be a natural reconnaissance before, or at least as part of contingency planning for land invasion, and that is exactly the impression that the Russians wish to convey. It's been combined with manoeuvres very close to Ukraine's borders involving rockets that are capable of reaching very large distances and firing thermobaric fuel air bombs that basically are vacuum bombs recently developed in Russia in this, for this sort of delivery system, all saber rattling to try to get the central government in the Ukraine basically to shift its attitude back towards being pro-Kremlin. But there's no sign of that at all. Indeed, the central government has been incapable really of recapturing any of the government buildings in the east of the country that is lost to these pro-Russian militants. That may well be because they're trying to avoid the bloodshed that could trigger a Russian invasion. But I have to say, as I've been saying for several days now, life goes on outside of these areas where these militants are operational, completely as normal in this relatively wealthy series of provinces in the east of Ukraine. One could find oneself or believe oneself to be anywhere in Central Europe if it weren't for the occasional roadblocks.